Hello everyone, and welcome back to another lesson in the history of Monster Hunter. This is part 5.8, and the continuation of the history series after its end with the release of the Iceborne video. I honestly wasn't sure if I was going to continue the series after Iceborne. When I started work on the original history video, Iceborne was already out, and so I had plenty of work and content to process through for each individual video. It's been almost a year since the release of part 5.5, with Rise not only releasing but receiving several large updates within that period. While analytical and purely objective videos are what got me started on YouTube, they aren't some of my best content. Rather, a lot of work goes into more retrospective opinion pieces as of late, where I both get to include all of the features of an individual release but also talk about my opinions on the entry as a whole. While we don't get that here, these videos look to be presented as a piece people can come back to or point to when individuals are simply looking to learn about the historical development of an entry, as well as all of its features, without the analysis attached to a retrospective. Additionally, I've already reviewed Rise twice. I have little more to say opinion-wise on the game itself until the release of Sunbreak later this year. Generally speaking, you will see a fair bit of differences between what we consider a mainline game and a portable game, but that isn't necessarily the case with Rise, and I plan on looking into why that might be exactly. The differences between directors and teams is a huge factor in how an entry is going to feel overall. Portable Third feels very different from 3 Ultimate despite being created in the same generation, and that is in part due to design decisions and aesthetic stylization from different directors who work on the series. Rise also tried a lot of new things and concepts. It added in Wirebugs, it introduced Palamutes. There's a lot of Rise that is similar to World, but it managed to differentiate itself enough as its own entry within the series, and I hope to show that to you today. If you haven't watched my previous videos on the history of the series, I suggest you do so now. There's a convenient collaboration release that has all of the parts before this one included, and I'll link it in the description below. Additionally, if you enjoy these videos and want to help support the channel, please consider liking the video and subscribing. It just takes a couple of seconds and really helps boost the reach of the video to Monster Hunter fans everywhere. What led Monster Hunter to become the Capcom powerhouse it is today, and how did the series perform since its initial inception and release in 2004? In this multi-part video series, we'll take a look at all 5 generations of the Monster Hunter franchise and several other spin-off games that have been developed. I'm Super Rad, and today I'm here to bring you a brief history of Monster Hunter Rise. Monster Hunter Rise was released on March 26, 2021. Depending when I actually get to release this video, that'll be about 1 year ago, leading to some of you potentially scratching your heads and asking why there's a history video for it already. The simplest answer is that fundamentally, Rise will be basically feature complete by the time this video releases, with maybe 1 or 2 title updates coming out beforehand. Similar to the World and Iceborne videos, it's easier to break up the releases due to how much an expansion can add in comparison to previous entries. When I released the Iceborne video, we hadn't even had Fatalis announced yet, and I'm not expecting as big an addition to Rise before the release of Sunbreak. In terms of mechanics, monsters, and features, everything Rise has to offer is already here, and we can then begin pointing it out. The development history is a little more interesting than normal within this entry, and this is due to it helping shed a bit of light on the team structure within Capcom internally. Now, I want to be very clear before discussing this specific section that this is more speculative than completely factual, but it's based on research and evidence I have gathered and will submit into the description when available. If that sounds scary, like I'm about to make some pretty controversial claims, you can rest easy, because that's not the case. Rather, I have simply seen some internal development changes made in terms of team structure within Capcom, and this is in part due to Ryozo Tsujimoto and his promotions within the company, and I'm also not the only one that has noticed this. Some of these changes potentially even go back to World and could fundamentally change how we perceive what a generation within Monster Hunter is. Generally speaking, we know of 2 development teams, those being the mainline team and the portable team respectively. Within a generation, generation, each team will release one new entry, and within that entry, potentially a G or Ultimate Edition as well. Ichinose, for example, is generally the director of the portable team games and was the director for Rise specifically. Interestingly, however, Ichinose will not be the lead in Sunbreak, and the reins have been handed over to Yoshitaka Suzuki. It should be no surprise that the director is a large part in making the aesthetic and mechanics of a particular entry feel unique. You can tell when a game is mainline and you can tell when a game is portable because the design aspects of it are heavily influenced by the director. Portable games get influenced heavily by Ichinose's inclusion. Freedom Unite and Portable Third feel mechanically and aesthetically similar even while being a generation apart, and the same could be said for Portable Third and Rise in my opinion. So this could mean that while Sunbreak is an expansion to Rise, it could be a full overhaul in terms of aesthetic and mechanics. We will have the design base that Rise left us, but the game could feel completely different because there's a brand new director attached to it. This has been happening in mainline for a long time. Many of the mainline releases have different directors. Yuya Tokuda directed World and Daisuke Ichihara directed Iceborne, and while they feel similar, Iceborne definitely adds mechanics and decisions that make it stand out from the base release. What makes this so interesting though is how I speculate the idea of teams to be rather redundant by this point within the internal development of Capcom. Keep in mind that this is not speaking objectively but theorizing based off of the information I have at hand. Ryozo Sugimoto does not direct specific games, but rather acts as a producer for them, although not for Monster Hunter 4. Back in 2018, Ryozo had a large promotion taking over for Yoshinori Ono, which had him overseeing all of Capcom's development division too. He was also promoted from managing corporate officer to executive corporate officer, but this was more flavor text than anything else. In theory, this means that Ryozo has been stepping back and less involved with Monster Hunter specifically, which heavily influences its overall design. So now you may be asking, how does that affect Rise specifically, and what does this have to do with the portable and mainline structure? Ryozo's promotion highlights a key shift in management within the internal framework of the teams at Capcom, but it doesn't necessarily say anything about the separation of the teams themselves. Rather, we can get a better glimpse at that by looking at Iceborne's credits and comparing them to the Rise ones. You'll notice a fair bit of overlap if you compare the names. A lot of members who are known as mainline or portable developers are credited in both games now, more than you would expect when considering these are supposed to be two different teams. So what does this tell us or infer? It implies that the teams have converged in some way. Mainline and portable teams seem to be more the same than not, and the major differences lie in who is directing the team at the time and for what. An individual could potentially have been working on Iceborne and Rise at the same time. There's more evidence to suggest this. In an interview back in 2019, Ryozo mentioned how Capcom's Game Development Division 2 is made up of 700 people, and with upwards of 300 people working on Monster Hunter in general. Meanwhile, other members may be working on other titles, things like Onimusha, Ace Attorney, Dragon's Dogma, etc. Consider the amount of IPs Capcom has and the amount of people they would need working on them. Then consider the overlap we see between credits in Iceborne and Rise. It starts to form a narrative that there aren't necessarily two teams anymore, but one Monster Hunter team that switches directors for, each release. This isn't the only place we've seen converging either. Genki Susano, one of the former producers for Frontier, has since been relocated into working on core Monster Hunter titles. Community influencer Kogath pointed this out in a tweet back in January of 2022, pointing out how Susano was shown in the Rise credits for the PC version specifically. However, Susano's involvement was most likely little more than making sure the PC port turned out well, considering their experience with PC Monster Hunter thanks to Frontier. So this means Iceborne had members of both mainline and portable teams. Further, it means Rise had members of both mainline and portable teams on top of Frontier members starting with the PC version. We may see more Frontier devs credited in Sunbreak as well. Rather than dividing games into teams, it seems individuals have been added to a melting pot to make Monster Hunter entries stronger in general, at least in Capcom's eyes. This in turn could change how we view generations. If there is only one team and they are releasing games and expansions yearly, what will we consider a generation moving forward? Will we get a mainline release plus expansion followed by a portable one similar to World and Rise, or will we see large releases yearly that are meant to stand beside one another? Monster Hunter in general has mostly been on an annual release timeline within Japan, so it's not like much has changed in terms of when the games release. It's interesting to think about. The only time we've actually seen a real gap was between Cross and Double Cross from 2015 to 2017. The teams have potentially merged, and Capcom just didn't feel the need to announce it to us because why would they think we care about that? Well, I care about that, and many others do, but I can't blame them for thinking we wouldn't. Moving back to Rise specific history, the game was originally designed for the Nintendo Switch, something the team was excited about considering World was the first global multi-console manufacturer release, being on the PS4, Xbox One, and PC. That doesn't mean that it wasn't going to be on PC, it has a PC release, but you can tell it was designed and developed with the Switch specifically in mind, and in turn wanted to create a game that was designed around the ability to be portable. It was a return to form in a way, since the portability of the series was a big factor in what sparked its popularity. Bolstering their development efforts was the fact that the game was being created on the new RE engine, an incredibly powerful engine that is used by Capcom internally for the majority of their releases now. Devil May Cry 5 and many of the recent Resident Evil games have been on this engine as well, meaning MT framework is currently a thing of the past, and this seems to be for the better as the RE engine is more modern overall and fairly lightweight. The PC release of Rise runs incredibly smoothly on even a toaster. In fact, it was thanks to the RE engine that the team was able to utilize open world seamless maps similar to World on the Nintendo Switch. Possibly one of the more impactful parts of development with Rise was the fact that it was developed within the ongoing pandemic. This could heavily hinder the amount of time and effort possible to work on the game overall. Certain team members worked from home, while others worked during offset hours to avoid overlap within the office space, and the arrangement of the office had to be shifted to allow for proper social distancing. This allows us to briefly talk about the elephant in the room. Rise released with no delays, but it released in a way that many people feel was unfinished. It's not my place in this video to say whether or not this is the case. In terms of interviews and marketing, Ryozo is on record as saying that the game was released as intended, on time, in part due to the measures they took. Whether or not they have to hold off on content for title updates is currently unknown, but we did receive title updates, and said updates felt like they were simply there to finalize Rise rather than add additional content, a sentiment many players have been vocal about online. Personally, I think it's almost impossible for the development of a game like Monster Hunter to not be hindered due to the pandemic. The release of updates 2.0 and 3.0 really felt like they tied the Rise experience together and created a full product. While its original release missed the mark somewhat, it's very easy to assume the pandemic had something to do with this, but we can't be certain without actual evidence, and that's not something the marketing side of Capcom is going to want to admit. In terms of reception, the Switch release sold incredibly well with 7.5 million units shipped in October, well before the release of the PC edition, which came out in January of 2022. As of said release, the game has reached over 8 million units worldwide. Reviews were also generally positive. I actually checked the Wikipedia article for this and saw people praising the advanced and high-speed movement, as well as how short hunts are now in comparison to older games. I feel the need to mention that irks me, but if that's what you like about the series now, Rise did it really well. It's really short. The PC release also brought with it graphical updates, although these are nowhere near the level of which the RE engine can actually offer, most likely due to the development of the game being centered around the Switch. Still, Monster Hunter at 4K and 144 FPS is a possibility now, and the RE engine allows the game to be as smooth as butter on the right hardware. Certain aspects unique to Nintendo had to be reworked or removed for this. The daily jackpot that required the use of an amiibo, for example, was changed to a service players could interact with using the in-game currency, and layered armor unique to amiibos are locked out entirely as of writing this. Rise was developed in a way that felt it was trying to emulate an energy that the old school or portable series specifically had been doing for years now. This is in large part thanks to Ichinose as director, as his games aggressively let you know that they were made by him through aesthetic and design. But there's a lot of similarities and differences between Rise and World mechanically. Monsters are even effective affected by this as they retain a lot of patterns and attacks from previous old school generations. So while Rise is considered a 5th gen game, it feels like the players and weapons have been updated for it, while the monsters have stayed more so the same. This isn't true for every hunt, however. Similar to World, Monster Hunter Rise looked to add a bit more cinematography and storytelling to a series that rarely has it at the forefront, 4U being one of the major exceptions. Unlike World, however, the storyline in Rise takes a step back from the forefront to better focus on actual gameplay and flow. Cutscenes are fairly short, and there aren't a lot of them. They're to the point, they're all skippable, and there's rarely any long conversations that you are forced to mash through in order to finally progress to the next hunt. Additionally, all hunts that are unlocked do not follow World's assignment system, meaning that as soon as a hunt is unlocked, a player can invite hunters to tag along with them. There is no longer an issue where players have to advance through an area and view a cutscene before being able to play with friends or randoms online. And when there is a cutscene involved with a quest, such as monster introductions, a mechanic has been added to allow players to vote to skip it. If there's a party member that wants to watch these short cutscenes, there's no one forcing them not to, and if no one wants to watch them, they can be easily skipped with a button press. Personally, I found this allowed Rise to feel similar to an old school experience and less stuck on the rails of a narrative-driven one. This isn't bashing World, but in terms of storytelling, Rise is much more similar to other entries we've received in the past, while World tried to do something completely new and different. In terms of actual content, there's not too much to say. The main storyline of Rise focuses on monsters within the various areas of the game seeming to be frenzying and creating what is known as a rampage. The source of the rampage is unknown, but originally thought to be caused by the new flagship monster in the series, Magnamalo. Players first run into Magnamalo during a cutscene after a rampage, but do not directly interact with it until a hunt sometime later. Unfortunately for Kamura Village, it turns out that Magnamalo is not the source of the issues plaguing them, and soon Wind Serpent Ibushi is designated as the next target to hunt in order to put an end to things. Players manage to repel Ibushi, but not kill it, and around this time the maidens Hinoa and Minoto become possessed by the spirits of Ibushi, but also another unknown monster who turns out to be Thunder Serpent Narwa. Rise technically ends with the players facing off against Narwa within a siege zone and manages to repel her as well, thus saving the village as far as we knew at the time. See, Rise released with the story incomplete. Despite the hunter repelling both Narwa and Ibushi, the maidens still remained possessed, and the story ended on this cliffhanger. That was until the release of 2.0 and 3.0. With 2.0, the HR cap was unlocked and allowed players to level it up to take part in new quests, specifically the 3 elders Kushala, Teostra, and Chameleos, which effectively acted as downtime between story beats. Following the release of 3.0 is when All Mother Narwa was released. Players would fight Ibushi in the same location they fought Narwa previously, and then be taken underground to witness Narwa kill Ibushi and take its power in order to become an enhanced version of her former self. And yes, I believe you would consider it a variant. Upon the hunter defeating All Mother with the help of Magnamalo, or several of the Elder Dragons depending on repeated playthroughs, the hunter finally truly saved Kamura Village and the twins, thus allowing the lead up this summer for the Sunbreak storyline. Now that may have sounded a bit odd, having the main storyline end in a cliffhanger only for the game to actually feel feature complete after 2 major updates. This is what I mean when discussing the contrast between what the marketing side of Capcom has to say about the development of the game versus what we are actually seeing and experiencing. Rise 1.0 didn't feel like it had a true start and finish with all the content you expected out of a base game, and it only did feel like that after 2 major title updates. It's easy to theorize that this was due to the pandemic and how development was evidently hindered. Regardless, the updates were free and came pre-packaged in the later released PC version, meaning anybody waiting to play this specific release would have the full package from the get-go. In terms of Kamura Village mechanically, there's a fair amount to go over. Much of it is what you would expect. You have the smith, item shops, canteen, and player home. The smith itself is relatively similar to the one in World, but we'll talk more about equipment in a later section. The item shop, meanwhile, reintroduces the melding pot from previous entries, but now for charms and only charms specifically. In fact, this is the only way to get charms now. While World switched up the mechanics and made decorations random with charms crafted, craftable, Rise both return to the original mechanics while seemingly limiting them slightly. In previous entries, talismans could be found while out on a hunt, potentially through gathering or quest rewards, and players could then see what kind of talisman they received after completing their quest. Generation 4 upgraded the process with the Melding pot, which allowed players to turn in older, lower quality talismans for newer ones. Rise brings back the melding mechanic, but not the ability to get charms randomly on the go. To make up for this, the Melding pot has been given advanced functionality in terms of how you generate these items. There's multiple tiers available to the hunter as they progress through the game, starting with Reflecting Pool. Here, players can specify a skill from a limited list of what I would describe as low rarity skills. Doing so will give the hunter between a 70 to 100% chance of obtaining a talisman with said skill. Players can then offer up monster materials worth varying amounts of points, and by offering enough points, in this case 10, can generate a talisman that will be unlocked for them after one quest. It should be pointed out that the hunter can have 10 orders at any given moment, meaning in this example they could create the orders, perform 10 hunts, and then return to get 10 talismans. The Haze tier of Melding is similar to Reflecting Pool in that the hunter can specify a set of slightly better skills or overlapping skills for their talisman, with the rate of success being between 30 to 50%. Also similar to Reflecting Pool, players can generate only one talisman per order. I believe it also has a better chance of providing a higher rarity talisman, meaning the opportunity to gain additional decoration slots or a secondary skill as well. Talismans cost 40 points worth of monster materials here. The Moonbow tier once again offers a higher tier of skills while also having overlap with Haze. Skill chance ranges from 10 to 40%, and the rarity of obtainable talismans is increased. Players could also generate up to 3 talismans per order, leading to a total of 30 talismans generated after 10 hunts. Talismans cost a whopping 150 points per talisman, meaning you'd have to pay 450 points worth of materials to maximize a single order. Wisp of Mystery tier is similar to the previous tiers but without skill selection, making the process completely random. To help offset this, players could make 5 talismans per order at a rate of 150 monster points per talisman. Finally, there is the Rebirth tier, which is the most similar to Melding of the past. Players can sacrifice 20 talismans of any rarity in order to create 3 new talismans per order. Considering how many talismans can be generated through the previous tiers, this is a way of offloading all of the player's excess to roll for something potentially better. You specifically have to sacrifice 20 talismans to create 3 new ones. There's no multiple payment thresholds like the previous tiers. There's plenty of other mechanics within Kamura Village as well, including a player home that is not fully customizable but does allow for the player to hang up various scrolls or photos within the interior by talking to their housekeeper. Players may also earn little trinkets that can be displayed within. Some of these carvings can be obtained within the new jackpot system, introduced with the release of the Switch version. By using an amiibo, a player can take part in the lottery daily with various tiers of consumable item rewards based on what type of result they get. Receiving a jackpot is the best a player can obtain, and these rewards give them the opportunity of receiving carvings to be placed within their home. And you're probably not seeing any carvings in this footage because I did not collect any. This lottery mechanic was reworked within the PC version to cost in-game currency and was allowed to be completed multiple times a day after a set amount of quests per attempt. Some of the carvings are also locked behind collecting hidden messages scattered across each of the in-game maps. By collecting all 60 of them, players can unlock 10 carvings of various monsters. And again, I didn't do this. I did this on the Switch version, and I'm recording this on PC. And I didn't do it, and I'm sorry. One additional feature within the player home is Fukushigi the Informant, who players can talk to by interacting with one of their walls within the area. Fukushigi is a means of informing the player of various lore related to the characters of Kamura Village. For example, it's heavily implied that Yomogi is somehow related to royalty from a distant land. Now that we have more information about Elgato and the new Chiche NPC, who appears to be royalty of some kind within the recent trailer, it may turn out that she and Yomogi are related. Speaking of Yomogi, she is the individual who runs the canteen within Kamura Village. Similar to other entries by Ichinose, Rise has a fairly unique take on how food buffs are bestowed upon the player. Players will be given a selection of various dongo that I believe both cycle out from time to time and are initially unavailable until the player upgrades the canteen through various requests. Each dongo comes with its own feline kitchen ability, as they were better known in past iterations. They're now dongo abilities. Players can then choose up to 3 unique dongos dongos to create a combined meal, with each dongo having a percentage activation chance that can be raised through the use of a dongo ticket. Players will also receive an HP and stamina boost based on how far they've upgraded the canteen by this point. Now, before moving on to the other individual areas around Kamura, I feel it important to point out that this area is fully explorable with you and up to 3 other party members. Unlike Worlds Astera or Celiana, online interaction is not limited to the Gathering Hub specifically. Instead, players can enter and exit the hub and walk around the village while being visible to the host player and other party members. The Gathering Hub still has its uses, however, and acts as an amalgamation of all the mechanics seen within the main area of Kamura Village. Players can eat here, they can access the item shop, upstairs there's a smith and weapon merchant as well as a housekeeper, allowing you to access various other features I haven't touched on just yet. While the players have the freedom of going around the village together, it's not necessary to do so, as everything they'll actually need for hunting can be found within the hub itself. Additionally, multiplayer quests can only be posted and selected within the hub. This, in my opinion, gives the hub a lot of reason to be utilized by players and helps it not feel as desolate as the hubs in World and Iceborne may have in the past. Another major area within the village is the Buddy Plaza, which has functionality for 3 mechanical features, the first of which is the ability to hire both Palamutes and Palicos. Players that start Rise get to customize both their own personal Palico and Palamute similar to World, and Palamutes are a new inclusion entirely. Palicos can have one of various support types, those being Healer, Assist, Fight, Bombardier, and Gathering. Healer is what you would expect, while Assist allows the Palico to place traps on the map. Fight and Bombardier, meanwhile, are more aggressive support styles, with Bombardier specifically allowing the launching of barrel bombs at monsters. Gathering is possibly one of the most useful support types, as it allows the Palico to receive more monster part rewards during a hunt. It's not unlikely to see a hunter running 2 Palicos instead of a Palico-Palamute combo and having both of the cats set to Gathering support. Palamutes are a different can of worms altogether. With Rise's large open areas, Traversal is broken up between using the new Wirebug mechanic and using the Palamutes as a vehicle to get through areas faster. Players can call for their Palamute and ride it across the map with full player control. Palamutes can jump, dash, and even drift. They can also climb up areas with vines and other grippable surfaces that don't require Wirebugs. As a traversal mechanic, Palamutes are obscenely strong. Even within battle, riding a Palamute still allows you to use items, meaning things like sharpening your weapon are no longer stationary endeavors. The sheer boost to player mobility makes encounters significantly easier. On top of their basic equipment, Palamutes also get specialized tools that provide various effects. One example of this would be the Stout Core Fang that allows the Palamute to bite into a monster and attach a trap that can be attacked for additional damage. Players can hire a selection of pre-generated Palamutes and Palicos from the Buddy Scout, or if they prefer to, scout for a specific type of Palico or Palamute that will have the look and support type that the player desires. There's also various DLC partners to hire as well. Further into the Buddy Plaza is the Meowcenaries, where players can select one of the various areas in the map or a rampage, and then select from 1 or 3 options that dictate the types of rewards the animals will bring back. Players can then select up to 4 of their hired sidekicks, in any combination of Palico and Palamute they prefer, and use a special item called a Lagnia Apple to boost the amount and rarity of items received. This is just a rework of a mechanic that has been a staple within the game for a long period of time. The main difference here is how it has been simplified similarly to World, no longer requiring a minigame mechanic to take part in. The Argosy once again marks its return. In previous entries like 3 Ultimate, the Argosy had a very specific purpose in terms of trading items and collectibles for various rare goods. In World, the system was completely reworked, allowing players to buy sets of random consumables for points. Now the Argosy functions as the farm of Monster Hunter Rise, performing trade requests in order to generate items that the player has selected. Realistically, this is the same as the farm has been for a long period of time. It's specifically the same as Monster Hunter Generations. Players can select an item they want to be generated, and depending on the buddy's level, perform a bargain skill that can affect how many items will be generated, how fast they're generated, and much more. Again, using a Lagnia apple helps boost the effects of this. More interestingly is the ability to trade goods for points, which was a feature within Monster Hunter Generations back in Gen 4. Trade goods are things like herbal medicines, catalysts, and nets, consumables, or crafting materials that may sometimes be harder to find and can help the hunter bolster their inventory. Special goods, on the other hand, are generally reserved for things like wall scrolls, which can be placed in the player's home. Rare finds are the real gold here though. From time to time, Rondine Canteen will have various new rare finds that you can purchase. These can range from flash bombs to dash juice to even things like pale extract and Kelby horns, which are items notoriously annoying to collect due to how many you generally need through a full playthrough. For example, pale extracts are used to upgrade something like demon drugs into mega demon drugs, and one of the main ways to obtain them in the past would be to hunt a Kazoo or a Giganox, meaning getting a lot of them could take some time. Sure, there were alternatives here and there, such as the Meowster hunters in Generations, but never to the level we see in Rise. Not only can the player hunt a Kazoo, but they may also be able to buy up to 10 randomly when checking the rare find section. This is also the perfect time to mention Cahoots, which are various owl-like creatures from within the world of Rise. You have your own personal Cahoot you can customize, similar to Poogie in previous entries. In fact, this game's largest failing is not including Poogie at all. Hopefully we'll see him in Sunbreak. Within the Buddy Plaza, there is a large tree with a Cahoot nest at the top. By scaling it, players can gather from the nest after multiple quests to get various rewards. From the Buddy Plaza, there's one final zone to discuss within Kamura, and it's potentially Rise's biggest upgrade when comparing it to Monster Hunter World. The training area in Rise is now fully featured, in that the training dummy is now a fully interactable object that you can have function via different settings. For example, you can have the Tetronodon dummy be stationary, or you can have it attack periodically with melee or projectiles. You can set the height of its head where it's facing and whether or not it tracks the player. The dummy has weak points and hard points and can be knocked out via KO damage or hit with status ailments. It's a fully featured monster for the player to test out all of their abilities, no matter what they are. And for gunners, there's even a targeting range they can use to practice their aim. Other features include allowing the player to set the amount of Wirebugs they have. This can be made infinite so that the player doesn't need to wait to test various Silkbind abilities. It also allows you to Wirebug up to a secret area in the map that was used to predict the release of the new Apexes as updates were released throughout the year. Now, I'd like to backtrack a bit and return to the village proper, where we can now discuss the smith and a lot of the changes centered around weapons and armor. In terms of upgrading and forging weapons specifically, you're offered a combination of world and generations. Players will have to offer up required materials in order to upgrade throughout the tree, just like in world, and just like generations, they are required to offer a certain points worth of a specific monster's materials or gathering items in order to truly complete the upgrade. That being said, things like leveling up the weapon to unlock access to different trees has been removed to help simplify the process. The really big change for weapons here is in terms of ramping them up. With the new Rampage mechanic, which we haven't gotten into just yet, the player has the ability to spend their defender ticket rewards in order to ramp up their weapon and give it a specific boost. For example, you could give a weapon an infinity boost or a status ailment boost, and some of those effects have different tiers that are only unlocked higher up in the tree. What's really interesting about the mechanic is that some specific skills like Silkbind boost, which raise the damage of your Silkbind attacks, can sometimes only be found midway through the tree. So if you want it on a fully upgraded weapon, you need to make sure that you grab it before upgrading, or you could find yourself rolling back to get it. Rampages also lead to their own specific tree of weapons known as Rampage weapons. Originally, these weapons were customizable in that they could have their color pigment changed. After fully upgrading the tree, however, the weapon can be layered similar to the mechanic we saw in World. Unfortunately, this is the only tree that can be layered for some reason, which is hilarious, since I doubt any weapon type actively benefits from its Rampage tree in comparison to some of the other options, effectively making this addition meaningless and exclusionary for no justifiable reason. Moving on to armor, a lot more has been changed in comparison to weaponry. The biggest change to talk about is the removal of alpha and beta sets, meaning now each monster set generally comes in one style with a set of skills built around a particular playstyle. There's no beta sets and there's no Blade Master or Gunner distinction, fully converging everything into one selection. Upgrading has remained the same since then, with players spending a variety of armor spheres to level up their various pieces. A great change would have to be the simplification of the layered armor system. Players still need to pay with monster parts from time to time, but this has been hyper limited to very small amounts. The real cost to layered pieces is outfit vouchers, which the player will be rewarded with throughout their playthrough. This makes fashion hunting much much more accessible. Really, armor sets have been simplified to a very large degree. Even the armor set bonuses introduced in World have been fully removed or replaced with new decorations. There is a generic set bonus, but specifically for raising your elemental resistances, and you're still much better off mixing and matching pieces from different sets because of how powerful you can become with the right set of armor skills. Speaking of armor skills, they still follow the model introduced in World. There are a few nuances to some particular sets though. For example, the Narwa and Ibushi set receives some upgrades via the title updates. Players that maxed out their armor level for the piece could upgrade them further to unlock additional armor skills. Now, mechanically, weapons have changed significantly to what players may be used to from an entry like World. The weapons for the most part function like their World counterparts, but some features have been locked behind the new Silkbind mechanic. So what is Silkbind exactly? It's a way of limiting certain features of weapons like the Spirit Thrust attack from the longsword that could then be followed up with a Helmbreaker. That move still exists, but has been reworked into a Silkbind attack called Soaring Kick, which can then still be followed up with the Helmbreaker. It's no longer a move that players can use whenever they want if they have the Spirit Gauge for it. Now there's a Wirebug resource the player must keep track of as well. By default, hunters have 2 Wirebugs at a time and can temporarily have 3 if they pick one up on the field. Each Wirebug mechanic can use up 1 or 2 of these resources, and depending on the mechanics used, will lead to different cooldown periods. We'll talk about Wirebug mobility more later, but focusing on Silkbind attacks, these are the main resources used to allow hunters the ability to perform some of their more effective attacks overall. It's not just a means of limiting world functionality, however. Rise actually reintroduces various hunter arts from Monster Hunter generations and reworks them into Silkbind abilities. The longsword can use Sakura Slash in this game, for example. As of Rise's release, each weapon has 1 Silkbind attack that is permanently equipped to the weapon, and then 2 others that can be swapped out. These are known as switch skills, but this mechanic affects more than Silkbind attacks. On top of changing the Silkbind ability, players can customize the actual base mechanics of their weapon. Using longsword as an example again, the traditional Spirit Round Slash combo can be swapped out for the Spirit Reckoning combo seen on Valor style in Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate. Players can also change the draw attack from a single slash to a double slash if they prefer. Every weapon has this, and has in turn become fairly customizable in regards to the individual user's playstyle. It'll be interesting to see how Sunbreak expands upon this, and we already know that it's going to based on the trailers we've seen. The playstyles of weapons have been reworked slightly depending on which weapon type we are discussing, but no more is this seen than within the Hunting Horn, which is almost a completely different weapon overall. Whether you see this as an improvement or not is up to you, but the Hunting Horn has been possibly the most drastically changed in any other weapon other than bowguns in the history of Monster Hunter. If you want more info on the Hunting Horn specifically, feel free to check out my weapon history video on the subject. I've been talking a lot about Wirebugs, so it makes sense that we take some time now to discuss the various other mechanics surrounding them. Wirebugs are essentially a regenerating currency for various mechanics within the game. They affect your Silkbind abilities, your Traversal abilities, and even your Wyvern Riding abilities. Ice Blight has even been reworked within the game to lengthen the cooldown period when a Wirebug is used. We've already discussed Silkbind abilities, but as I've pointed out, there's much more to them than that. The main use of Wirebugs more so is their Traversal abilities. Hunters have 3 options while on the ground. They can Wirebug forward, upward, or within a manually selected direction. Each of these will use up one of the 2 to 3 Wirebugs the user currently has and begin the cooldown period. Wirebugging in the air and coming into contact with a wall allows the hunter to begin a wall run that depletes stamina over time until the player runs out and is forced to jump off. But the nice thing about this when traversing vertically is that players can use air time to regenerate stamina and wall running time to help curb the cooldown period on the Wirebugs, thus making it possible to reach the highest points of the map fairly easily even with just 2 Wirebugs. It's actually fairly important to point out that whether or not you have a Wirebug, you still need to attempt a wire jump in order to begin a wall run. As it's the hopping animation state that initiates the mechanic, this is actually being remedied in Sunbreak. When in the air thanks to a wire jump, players can press the dodge button to push themselves slightly forward. The length of this push can be boosted with Evade Extender, but it should be pointed out that doing this will prevent a wall run even if the hunter comes into contact with one. Additionally, the player can can hang in the air after a wire jump, but this will freeze the cooldown period until they begin actively falling or traversing again. The mobility of hunters within the series has been improved within almost every iteration. We really started to see this in Generation 4, and then saw a big push in Generation 5 with World. Now Rise has hunters as mobile as ever, possibly as fast as they ever could get. Even in battle, after being launched by an attack, hunters can now expend a Wirebug to perform a wirefall maneuver that can be used to get them out of deadly situations. Certain attacks like the Magnamalo combos actually require the use of wirefall to properly escape the danger. There's one final mechanic regarding Wirebugs, one that has removed the concept of mounting as we know it entirely. I'm of course talking about Wyvern Riding, a brand new feature that allows players to control monsters within a limited capacity, and for a limited period of time. By performing aerial attacks or silkbind attacks, players can build up mounting damage on a monster until it becomes rideable. Monsters that are not the quest target have a drastically low threshold for this, leading to easy rides, and monsters that attack other monsters can instantly put them into a Wyvern Ride state. This means Wyvern Riding is almost an inevitability within a hunt. You're almost guaranteed to always see it. Once riding, players have a timer which can be lowered over time and when their monster is attacked. Players also have a gauge they can fill by successfully attacking monsters. Once full, a finisher or punisher can be performed. There's a lot to Wyvern Riding that isn't overly apparent at a glance. To start, your Wirebugs act as a resource here as well, specifically for dodging. Players can perform light or heavy directional attacks with each monster, but to dodge they need to expend a Wirebug. This is because of how powerful the dodge mechanic is overall. It acts as an evasion mechanic, it can counter enemy attacks, it can cancel animations to allow you to attack faster, and it can prevent the monster from toppling over after dashing it into a wall so that you can repeat the process. Wyvern Riding as a whole is a mechanic designed around punishing monsters with other monsters or punishing the monster with itself. For example, if you end up Wyvern Riding your target, you generally have two options. You either bash it into a wall, dodge, and repeat the process until you run out of Wirebugs, or you could direct the monster to another one in the field and bash into it so that the second monster is now rideable, meaning you can attack your target monster with the secondary one. Honestly, it sounds like a lot, but generally speaking, you'll probably just be bashing your monster into a wall to deal high damage and then lead to a topple. The benefit of attacking with other monsters is the high damage output, as well as being able to inflict elemental blights onto the monster. While this may not be the perfect category for it, it's important to note that monsters can be affected by elemental blights now. Thunderblight, for example, can be afflicted onto a monster and make it so any attack to its head produces KO damage. Wyvern Riding as a whole tends to trivialize various items and mechanics such as invasions or dung bombs, and I have an entire video on that subject if you want to check it out. But mechanically speaking, it's one of the most unique additions to Rise, and one I was very excited about and would continue to be if they didn't force it to happen during a natural hunt. You're kind of forced into it as soon as the monster is in a rideable state, and players can't help you while riding as the monster will take mitigated damage from hunters during the process. Moving on, I'd like to talk about quests, which have reverted from world back to the more old school oriented approach. Once again, there are single player specific village quests and multiplayer specific hub quests, with village being limited to low rank. One big change mechanically though is the way key quests are presented. Previously, all key quests within a rank would need to be completed in order to progress to the urgent. In Rise, there is now an abundance of key quests, and the hunter only needs to clear a specific amount of them within a rank in order to move on, meaning they have some choice within which quests they want to complete and which they may leave for later. Additionally, players that complete low rank village within key points unlock license exams that help automatically raise their rank within the hub area to help prevent overlap in terms of low rank quests. In the past, if the player already completed village low rank, they would have to repeat the process in the hub before moving on to high rank. Now players that focus on village first are given challenge hunts. If all three are completed, they allow them to move into high rank right away. High rank is what you would typically expect, just with the new key quest system attached to it, and you also have to defeat a Jyuratodus in order to enter it. There isn't much of a difference between Rise high rank progression and the progression within older generations aside from the easier difficulty, and yes, that is a hill I will die on. Rise is the easiest game in the series. Title updates did unlock the HR cap for hunters and allow them to progress toward HR gated monsters, elder dragons like Kushala, Teostra, and Chameleos, and eventually up to the new variant for Valstrax. But there is one major addition to hunts that is a completely new game mode: Rampages. The Rampage is a storytelling device turned into a tower defense game mode where hunters can work together or solo to repel large swaths of monsters using siege equipment. For the most part, the hunter will be setting up different devices they unlock in between waves in order to strengthen their defense and better protect multiple barriers from hordes of enemies. And these enemies all have various archetypes. Certain monsters will be more prone to attack the hunter and their defense mechanisms, either from the ground or the air. Other monsters are more compelled to go straight for the various barriers in order to destroy them as soon as possible. The player then has to use the various tools at their disposal to both hinder the progression of the monsters with various effects as well as eventually killing or repelling them. To help with this, the various siege points can be set up with items like elemental barrel bombs, and hunters have access to dragonators and the wyvern shot explosion that deals high damage to the monsters surrounding them, and the cooldown period of these special options can be shortened by having a player add coal to a kiln while other players deal with the monsters. So there's a lot going on in Rampages already, and a lot of the equipment can either be unlocked or upgraded as the player progresses. This is boosted by completing random objectives like killing 10 monsters with the ballista as an example. These objectives reward points that level up the siege zone, thus giving the player more options overall. Monsters are still rideable within this game mode, and there's also a counter signal mechanic which makes players' normal attacks deal excessive damage, giving hunters a reason to get off of the equipment and deal with the monsters face to face. Players also get the ability to summon various Kamura Village members to perform special super attacks or support abilities. Fugen can kill most surrounding monsters instantly or heavily damage the larger ones. Or as another example, Yomogi can fire off a Gatling gun for an extended period of time. Particularly strong monsters like Apexes may lead to a final wave in which the monster instantly destroys all barricades and leads players to an extended area where they have to protect the main gate of the village, but not much changes outside of this. Similar to the Wyvern Riding mechanic, there's mixed opinions in terms of Rampages. I never particularly enjoyed them, but they definitely are more enjoyable when done with the group. Regardless, it's hard to tell if Rampages will even be a feature of some kind in Sunbreak, or if they will be replaced by something completely different. At the moment, only time will tell. I've spent a lot of time pointing out all of the features and interactions between the player and the various areas that they will be placed within, but haven't really described the areas themselves. Monster Hunter Rise has a similar focus in world in creating large open areas for the player to explore. They even both share the camp mechanic, which facilitates fast travel across the map, as well as the ability to change equipment and restock on items. That's pretty much where the similarities end, however. While world focused on large, dense areas with very clear paths the hunter could take, except in Ancient Forest, Rise looked to create more open-ended exploration with giant valleys surrounding large vertical peaks. The Rise maps are designed around upward exploration, and the Wirebugs help facilitate that by allowing the hunter to launch themselves upward, wall run, and effectively travel in the air for a limited period of time. This means that while the areas are less grounded and dense, there is still plenty to see and explore within the map. And when exploring, there's plenty to find, and to help facilitate travel, players can find jewel lilies around each area to set up permanent great wirebug spots that launch the hunters across the map. For one, there's hidden collectible messages that can be found throughout each map, and collecting them bestows large amounts of resource points as a reward to the player. Collecting enough of them can unlock some of the carvings I talked about earlier. What really encourages you to explore the area within each hunt, however, is the inclusion of a brand new mechanic known as Spirobirds. In previous entries, players can maximize their stats before or during a hunt with various items and canteen meals: health, stamina, attack, defense, etc. Right? You could pump these to their maximum potential by using the right items and eating the right food before actually engaging with a monster. Now, entering a hunt, whether you use the canteen or not, it is impossible to have the maximum amount of HP and stamina. Instead, players are expected to run around the map and find Spirobirds of different colors so that they can raise the maximum amount of these stats. It's the same for attack and defense as well. Players can raise their overall effectiveness within a hunt by first traveling around the map and collecting these birds every hunt. Personally, I found it to be an inclusion that created a problem rather than added a bonus. Spirobirds inherently limit you unless you want to go out and loop around the map every hunt before actually engaging with your target. But at the end of the day, that also doesn't really matter because Spirobirds are highly unnecessary unless taking part in very specific hunts. And some of the hardest story-specific hunts or rampages give you a Prism Spirobird at the start that maximizes all of your stats from the get-go. It definitely feels like an unnecessary mechanic dynamic because whether or not you use it, the hunt is still going to take you 5 minutes. On a more positive note, endemic life has not only marked its return, but has been made more functionally useful within a hunt. Creatures like paratoads or blastoads still exist but can be picked up and used as items later. Blastoads specifically can knock down a monster if hit, and there's plenty of new creatures as well. Some of the endemic life can help you wyvern ride a monster or get one to follow you to another location. Some can give your hunter passive benefits. Rather than using World's design of collecting as many endemic life as possible, they are now tools that can be used and found on the fly to make a hunt feel more dynamic. One other major difference between World and Rise is the overall change in terms of tracking a monster. Generally speaking, monsters appear on the map at all times, so you always know where they are. If you haven't seen them before, they'll appear as a question mark, but once interacted with, their typical icon will appear instead. And these areas around the map are covered in clouds or fog of war style design that only disappears as the hunter explores the area. Essentially, both the concept of paintballs from old school entries and the concept of tracking from World have been removed entirely within Rise. The first fully unique area players will explore is the Shrine Ruins. It was the first area we saw in the trailers and in gameplay footage, and possibly the most well-known area within Rise itself. What makes it unique is how tall the mountains around it are, as well as the ruined buildings that can be destroyed by monster attacks. Frost Islands is another unique area to this entry and acts as the cold weather location seen in multiple other entries. This is a good time to point out that the concept of hot and cold drinks has been removed completely. No longer is it a requirement for players to drink to prevent heightened stamina depletion or damage over time. The area is fairly open and houses a Zora Magdaros skeleton. It also has a few cavern style areas to explore as well. Sandy Plains is a returning area from Generation 3. Normally I wouldn't include a repeated area, but since it's an old school location recreated for the new open area model, there's a lot of differences overall. More verticality, the ability to drop into caverns, etc., but multiple locations remain reminiscent of the design we saw back in Monster Hunter Tri. Similarly, Flooded Forest also marks its return and interestingly allows the player to fully explore the giant pyramid location that was merely a backdrop in the older games. I thought the inclusion of Flooded Forest was an odd one considering Shrine Ruins seems to follow a similar theme. Would have been cooler to finally see D Island in the next generation or something. The new volcanic area is called Lava Caverns. It starts off on the outskirts of a large volcano, but players can head further into the volcano itself to find a heated and magma-filled location. Interestingly, it isn't all like this. The caverns eventually lead to a less intimidating water-filled location where some monsters prefer to hang around. In terms of siege locations, there's a Rampage map we've discussed already, as well as the Coral Palace used for hunters to battle against Narwa and Ibushi. This area can turn into a secondary zone when fighting Allmother. There's both a Dragonator and Wyvern shot available when on the upper level, but funny enough, the Dragonator is used by Allmother within the lower levels against the hunters fighting her. Finally, there's a more rare area dedicated to some specific advanced quests and event quests. Known as the Infernal Springs, hunters travel here to take part in the quests Proof of Power and Those Crowned Apex, both of which are trio hunts. Outside of these quests, the area is fairly underutilized, especially since most quests of this type take place in the game's new arena zone. Moving on to the final section of features, we can finally begin talking about the monsters themselves, and Rise in particular laid on the theming within this entry. The big theme here is yokai, which exist as supernatural entities within Japanese folklore. Each of the new monsters introduced in the series are in some way based off of a different yokai and their themes, and as I introduce each monster, I'll make you aware of which yokai they are based on. One of the first large monsters you'll run into is the bird wyvern Great Izuchi, which seems to fall into a similar family of Great Baggy and Ragi, which are also in this entry. Izuchi are based on Kamaitachi, rodent-like yokai that ride dust in the wind and cut people with knives that are in the shape of sickles, thus leading to Izuki's sickle-like tail. Following Izuki is the bird wyvern Aknasam, who is based off of the yokai Kasa Obake, a spirit in the form of an umbrella that hops around on one leg. You can see a lot of this in the design of Aknasam that often stands on one leg and has features of an umbrella on its head and wings. Next is Tetronodon, an amphibian creature based off of the popularized Kappa, potentially one of the best known yokai outside of Japan. Kappas aren't only amphibian in nature, but are also known to love sumo wrestling, thus leading to the sumo style attacks we often see Tetronodon pull off within a hunt. Bishatin is a fanged beast based off of another popular yokai, that being a tengu. Tengu have been likened to both birds of prey and the Japanese monkey deity, which is shown within the overall design of Bishatin, who comes off as a feathered monkey with wings. Bishatin is one of the more unique monsters within this entry due to its fruit mechanic that it tosses for various effects. By knocking Bishatin down, players can pick up and utilize the fruit that the monster drops. Similar to Bishatin, Somnikanth has its own unique mechanic involving seashells. A leviathan based on a mixture of Japanese and Western mermaids, Somnikanth can utilize the sleep ailment as well as various types of shells that it will break on its chest while lying on its back, similar to an otter. One of these effects can cause blast blight, making Somnikanth at the time one of the only monsters that could do this. Some people assume Magnamalo can as well, considering its weapons are blast, but this is actually the Hellfire ailment, and a new unique ailment we'll discuss soon. Almadron is a slightly larger mud-based leviathan. Its manipulation of mud leads to several structures being formed during the battle, as well as puddles that can trap you within them while zapping your HP. It can also form a giant mud ball on its tail that it uses to crush prey. Rightfully, it's based off of Jyuratodus, or a Japanese mud spirit, while also having features reminiscent of a catfish. The catfish style may be to show maturity or age, since Jyuratodus are the spirits of old men who toiled in rice fields. Goss Harag I always saw as Barry the Chopper from Fullmetal Alchemist, as a dude or a spirit in a suit, rather than some animal or monster, but Goss 2 is based off of a yokai, that being Namahage. The perception and tradition of Namahage has shifted over the years, but they are best known as spirits with Oni mask style faces that go door to door berating children for being lazy or something. Raknakadaki is a particularly unique monster, as it's been a long period of time since we've received a new Temnoceron species, and never one this big before. It's based off of the Jorogumo, a spider-like yokai that can shapeshift into a beautiful woman. This is represented by the giant spider using its silk to appear as a bride. Players can break the silk around Rakna's body temporarily during the battle and eventually lead to a very large topple. The flagship of Rise, Magnamalo, is specifically designed around the aesthetic of samurai armor, rather than yokai specifically. What makes him unique is his new Hellfire Blight, which can be afflicted on hunters. Similar to Blast, and leading to some confusion, Hellfire will eventually blow up over time and deal damage to the hunter. However, hunters that wirebug forward can drop the blight like a puddle. Should Magnamalo walk over it, it can blow up and lead to a topple. During the fight, Magnamalo will cover itself in Hellfire, and hunters can break through this for various openings. Magnamalo is possibly one of the faster and more aggressive monsters in this entry, and has a better ability at keeping up with the new mobility we see in hunters. Now, Ibushi and Narwa are based off of Fujin and Raijin specifically. Not necessarily yokai, but Japanese gods of their respective elements, wind and thunder. Players fight Ibushi specifically within the Rampage map, and only recently were able to fight him outside of this after update 3.0. Narwa, on the other hand, is fought within the Coral Palace as a dedicated siege. Their attacks are based around bullet hell style dodging mechanics, creating large swaths of slow moving projectiles that the player has to work their way around. All Mother Narwa is another beast entirely. Its dedicated siege takes place after the hunters repel Ibushi into the underground section of the Coral Palace. Here, Narwa consumes Ibushi and takes on her final form, with eggs clearly visible within her abdominal region. All Mother comes with upgraded attacks, as well as a super finisher that players can interrupt by dodging various Dragonators, moving around the map, and attacking Narwa until she flinches. At one point during the fight, either Magnamalo or one of the Elder Dragon trio will show up to interrupt the fight and allow for a Wyvern Riding attempt. It's always Magnamalo upon first completion, and then can change in later attempts. There's one final new monster unlocked at HR 100, and it's a variant of an already existing one. Crimson Glow Valstrax permanently glows red and has upgraded wings to better output Dragon Element. The main feature of Crimson Glow is the ambush mechanic, where it can come crashing down like a jet at any point during the hunt in which it is present. I also want to point out that various returning monsters have received reworks here and there. For example, Jyuratodus has been changed slightly due to how water areas work now. I won't mention everything, but I want to point out that Bisarios specifically has had a huge mechanical change in terms of where its weak points reside. Originally, Bisarios and in turn Gravios were just huge slabs of rock, making it difficult for slashing hunters to be effective against them unless building specific skills that could properly bypass this. Now Bisarios will have certain parts of its body heat up based on the types of fire attacks it uses, thus softening the rocks and making them susceptible to more damage. It's very similar to Agnactor and allows hunts to go by more smoothly. It should also be pointed out that Basil and Allmother were released within the updates, but were not announced, leading them to being a surprise inclusion. Now, all the new monsters I mentioned and the returning ones are not the only things you'll you'll be fighting in Rise. On top of all I've mentioned, there's also the inclusion of Apex monsters, and if you're scratching your head, confused, it's not your fault. Apex is a term used in many franchises, used to describe the absolute top of something. A monster could be an apex when it's at the top of the food chain. However, years ago, Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate established Apex as a title for a specific state of monster and made it an active mechanic within that entry. Monsters had new moves and required special items to be dealt with effectively. Now, the term has been brought back to describe a set of monsters in Rise, but not as we have known Apexes in 4 Ultimate. Instead, this is a brand new state of being for them. Why did this happen? Well, the easiest explanation is localization mistakes. Rise was outsourced for localization and not done by the original team. Even then, it seems this overlap wasn't caught or checked by a higher party before release. Realistically, Apexes in Rise should have been titled something different to avoid this issue, but it seems the past iteration of Monster Hunter, 4U, flew under the radar of those localizing it and no one caught the error. You can tell it's outsourced when comparing it to the world credits. It's another team entirely. Andrew Alfonso, localization director at Capcom, even pointed out that he had nothing to do with it on Twitter. So with that out of the way, what are Apexes in Rise exactly? Mainly, they are diluted versions of deviants in Monster Hunter Generations. Objectively, any monster that has been an Apex thus far has also been a deviant in Generations. While not exactly the same, all of the Apexes pull somewhat from the deviant moveset, hit harder, and are generally more aggressive than their typical version. Mechanically, there's a lot to talk about with Apexes, but not of the monsters themselves, more so the mechanics surrounding them. First, let's list all of the available fights in 1.0. You had Apex Arzuros, Rathian, and Mizutsune, who all had deviants in Generations. You could only fight them within Rampages until this was changed in the later updates. This led to a few issues. For one, the monsters were not mountable within Rampages, and it seems like they were mechanically ripped out of the Rampage mode without any actual changes. The other major issue was that these monsters did not offer any unique armor, meaning fighting them was virtually useless. The most you could get out of an Apex hunt was unique materials to make specific decorations or upgrade Rampage weapons. In patch 2.0, Apex Rathalos and Diablos were both released as Rampages, and this was when the previous Apexes received their own hunts. Following this, patch 3.0 released Apex Zinogre and allowed all Apexes to be huntable. The real question is, will Apexes, or even Rampages for that matter, be something in Sunbreak? Apexes were specifically caused by Narwa and Ibushi, so there's good reason to not expect them in the expansion. That being said, Malzeno, the new flagship, seems to be causing its own set of issues that may affect monsters as well, so maybe the Apex moniker will stick. Though knowing how the storyline works in every Monster Hunter game, it's not actually going to be Malzeno, it's going to be some other monster that's the actual issue. As of writing this, Rise is ramping up for the release of its new expansion, Sunbreak, which will take us to a new village, new areas, and introduce brand new monsters and subspecies to us. It feels like, in regards to updates, Rise is finally on its way to being fully updated and complete. It's good to see, since the release of Rise 1.0 didn't necessarily feel like the full product we were promised, and wouldn't really feel like that until the release of 2.0 and 3.0, which helped tie everything together. I often see people complaining that Rise lacks an endgame of some sort, a reason to continue grinding after every monster has been hunted and the storyline has been completed. But for a base game experience, I think everything you could possibly want is there, and it wouldn't surprise me if Sunbreak offered what these people are after, similar to what Iceborne did with World, hopefully better than the grinding lands. While World seemed forced to change a lot of its various aspects and features in order to facilitate the new open environments, it felt like Ichinose directed the team in a way that led to a product that was aggressively portable inspired, and this helped bring back a bit of the old school charm I missed with the release of World and Iceborne. I really enjoyed my time with Rise, even if it may have been shorter in comparison to some other releases. And while it may be an easier experience overall, the new movement and mechanics introduced were definitely a breath of fresh air that prevented the series from stagnating. But with that, this is all I have for you in terms of the history of Monster Hunter Rise. These are long videos and require a lot of research. If for some reason there's an error, feel free to comment below and let me know. If any mistakes get pointed out to me, they usually end up in the description or pinned comment as a correction, so keep an eye out so that you're not all writing the same comment to me like what happened in my last retrospective video. If you enjoyed this video and found it informative, consider supporting the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. Again, it only takes a couple of seconds and helps support me in my goal of creating this content for you all. Additionally, we have a Discord server and I stream regularly on Twitch, and I have a VOD channel for those Twitch streams. You can find all the links in the description below. Be sure to stop by if you want to hear from me or offer suggestions. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey, thank you so much for making it to the end of the video. I have to unfortunately rush through the Patreon section because my computer is dying. I am currently in the process of editing the video and trying to get it out before my computer completely fails. So shout out to Cheap Seats Cody, Triton 8, Festive, Snowcart, Prime XD, The Tim Pie, Ashtray, Disparity, Joy Sanders, Beyond the Time, Christopher, Nolan Brookman, Carl the Crab, Mo Al-Kasemi, Captain Zeba, Cyberworm, Kathleen Medjuk, Crunchy Cowru, Jonathan, Strangely, Rosaleo, and Mr. Janky. Shout out to all those people. They're the G rank patrons. It's the highest tier on Patreon. If you are in the highest tier, you get a vocal shout out, and if you're in the medium or highest tier, you get the credits here. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. I hope you really enjoyed the video. Put a lot of research into it. Really had fun making it, despite the difficulties. And I will see you in the next video. I'm back. Also, big shout out to Kogath for all of the help with this video. They helped me get a lot of information for the development history section that I wouldn't have been able to get otherwise. So big shout out to Kogath. Thank you so much, man. Really appreciate it.